Welcome to today's Jewish Baseball More Than a Game podcast. Today's guest is a ball player whose journey spans continents, locker rooms, and a whole lot of resilience. Born and raised in Littleton, Colorado, Blake Dickman's baseball story really started to take shape after a move to Northern California in high school. He graduated from Elk Grove High, aka MLB High, a powerhouse that's produced names like Dylan Carlson, Rowdy Tellez, Nick Mandrigal, and Derek Hill. From there, Blake took his talents to Delta College, one of the top JUCO programs in the country, where he crossed paths with future Team Israel teammate Asaf Longart. I love Asaf. After a strong freshman season, Blake transferred to the University of Nevada, Reno, but his time there was marked by tough injuries and the disruption of COVID. Realizing it wasn't the right fit, he made the move to UC San Diego, where he had not only reignited his playing career, but also dove deep into Jewish life on campus. Blake eventually made his way to Israel, where he represented the country in the U23 qualifier, batting .500, and now plays for the senior national team. He also coaches the U18 national team and helps develop talent and at the Israel Baseball Academy. From Littleton to Tel Aviv, Blake's journey is much about perseverance and identity as it is about baseball. So, and also I just want to add, we have making her podcast debut, Maddie Lewis, and Blake, one heck of a resume, and I'm excited to dive in. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Danny. That's a great introduction. And Maddie and I are fellow UC San Diego alum, so it's nice to catch up and be here with her as well. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, really awesome to, have another Triton on the podcast, and I expect nothing less from a UC San Diego grad. But Blake, just what have you been up to lately? Where does this podcast find you? What's it like living in Israel? Let us know.
So I'm currently in lovely Tel Aviv. So like Danny mentioned, I've had the privilege of seeing the world and going to many different really cool places, spreading, the love of the game. And yeah, life right now takes me, I'm living full time in Herzliya. So, suburb just north of Tel Aviv. I'm working full time, but on top of that, I'm coaching. Like Danny said, I'm the associate head coach of the U18 national team. Within that, we have the Israel Baseball Academy that goes on over here, which is sort of like a feeder program into the national team. So we have a great group of young guys. We have the Maccabi games coming up this summer that we're gearing up for. So really just getting these guys ready to go for that. And then as a player, just staying in shape, training, and have a good regimen going on over here with some of the other guys that we have on the national team. And so we're training consistently, gearing up for the European Championship here in September.
Sounds like you got a packed schedule. Jeez.
Yes, that's to say the least.
So kind of walk me through a day of training with other national team guys over there.
Yeah, good question. So as I'm sure you're familiar with, we don't have all the resources we would like to have here in Israel that we're privileged on having in the States. So, but with that being said, we do have a couple of really nice facilities between the Baptist Village here in Israel, and then we have a brand new field in the past couple of years in Renana, and there we have we have access to some machines. We have a few cages, the bare minimum that you really need. We like to jokingly say it's like it's like we're in the Dominican here too. They may have even more resources than us, but no, we're dedicated. So, we do a lot of live at bats. That's been a big thing for us here. Catching bullpens. One of my roommates is a fellow national team player, Akiva Epstein. He's an up and coming prospect here in Israel. He was lights out for the U23 program in this past tournament for them. So really just, the two of us pushing each other and just gearing up for the SNT, for the senior national team again. And yeah, just making do with what we have essentially.
Sorry, Dan, didn't mean to cut you off there, but just want to jump in. And it's really cool to hear you say some of, the similar goals that you have as a Israel baseball member, and, mentioning familiar locations in Israel, familiar fields and whatnot. We've already had a ton of success within the game. What would you say is the ultimate goal you have with baseball, whether that's playing and coaching or coaching?
Sure. As a player, look, my goals, we want to take this thing as far as we can, right? We obviously have our goals set on winning. So hopefully, have as much success on the field in these tournaments as possible. And really, at this stage in my career, it's also really about just, building my network and just meeting really good guys. Not only are they just great teammates, but, we're building brotherhood and just, lifelong friendships with these guys. Being able to use not only my talent and my skill set, but just sort of my background coming from, playing Division I in the States and growing up in that world, really just, it complements nicely with what I do coaching wise, really trying to build things here from the ground up, really just, a lot of these kids have raw talent, but they don't really know all the ins and the outs and what it takes to, become a well-rounded ball player, and, teaching kids about the mental game and teaching kids, the, sort of intangibles that otherwise they wouldn't really have much, access to. So my goal really as a player is to just, build off of the base that I have, win some ball games. We have the European Championship, like I said, this September, and then afterwards, next year, we have the Olympic qualifier. So it'd be it's everybody's dream for no matter what sport they are to play at the Olympics. So God willing, that will manifest as well. But from a coaching perspective, it's just really about laying the groundwork here in the country, like I said, with limited resources, limited coaches, but really just, start to build.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, just kind of a question off of that answer, which was a great answer. What do you think you guys need over there, equipment wise, from the States? Any listener maybe can help out.
Yeah, well, shout out Israel Baseball Americas and our skipper Nate Fish and the whole team over there. They're doing great stuff on the ground in America, and they're sending, they're sending us resources, whether it be actual equipment, tangible things that we can use, or, just the expertise of some of these, the highest level ball players and coaches, not just in the Jewish baseball world, but just overall. We have a great staff there. So, they've been a huge helping hand for us. But, like I said, we could use everything. We have just very few buckets of baseballs in the entire country for guys to share. Guys don't have the luxury of even training on their own time, right? Outside of the allotted practice time, because we have to deal with some obstacles like the municipalities and dealing with, getting kicked off the field by soccer because we share a field with soccer and frisbee, for example. And so, access to any sort of equipment, bats, balls, gloves. We don't have a pro shop here, right? We don't have a Dick's Sporting Goods or anything in the country. So, everything is limited and we could always use more of everything. So if there are any listeners that want to, do a huge mitzvah and send us some equipment, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, I have to commend what you guys are doing with Israel Baseball and what Nate Fish and the rest of the staff has done with Israel Baseball in America. What would you say the culture of Israel Baseball is like, and how do you kind of, promote that to kind of continue to build this family and this brotherhood?
Great question. I think it's, we're still forming our identity. That's something that's sort of a work in progress. Like I said, coming from the States, bringing my perspective on how I was raised, as a ball player in that world, sprinkling in some of the culture that we're used to, while coupling that with just, Israeli culture. It's very different from the culture in the States. And, for example, we have a practice scheduled for, let's say, 7:00, and guys are showing up at, 6:58, and they're like, what do you mean? We're on time. Practice is at 7. It doesn't compute all the time. And like, you can't blame them. We jokingly say like, oh, like they run on like Jewish standard time or Israeli standard time, like that's just in the culture. So it's really just, finding the balance of what just naturally works with Israeli culture and kids and what they're used to, while also, sprinkling in really crucial components that, if the ultimate goal for these guys is to go on and play in the States or play in Europe, some of these things that, are just expected from a coaching standpoint that they just don't, fully understand. So it's really just, adding as much of the culture from the States as we can that would, realistically allow them to digest certain things and make certain adjustments, while also maintaining just that level of like chutzpah and just having like just play loose and have fun and just show up at like, it's very informal in a lot of ways, but, we're a national team and we compete against the highest level European teams. We actually, a couple of years ago, we won the Pony World Series qualifier in Europe for the first time. And we took a team to Texas in the States, and we played there were teams from Taiwan and Mexico and all over the States. So really high level baseball. And it's just, like I said, a matter of blending these two cultures together to really build our identity.
For sure. Yeah. Someone coming from, the student athlete routine and tough schedule, was that kind of an adjustment for you? You talk with like a big smile on your face, so it sounds like you've adjusted nicely to it. But yeah, what was that initially like when you first came in, and how did you kind of, adapt and get on the same page as them?
It was not easy. I got myself into some hot water a few different times with some parents and just, in general with, getting on these kids, and just, I had such high expectations or different expectations that I really had to, just learn as I went. And I'm fortunate enough, my head coach that I coach alongside with, Freddie Bain, he's phenomenal. He's the most level-headed guy I know, and just terrific, fantastic coach and mentor. And he really sort of guided me through the whole, adapting to this way of life, essentially, and how it relates to baseball. And it was definitely a learning curve for me. I'm still learning as I go. I also have to be, I have to be more gentle on these guys than I'm used to. I'm used to hard ass coaches with tobacco spit flying in my face and, running poles, and just, it was a different time. And I grew up in a different way, and that doesn't really fit over here. That's not in our DNA. So, just learning as I go and figuring out what works, what doesn't work. And it's been a process. It's been a journey, but I've loved every second of it.
That's pretty funny. I mean, don't worry though. Parents are probably just as crazy in the States, coaching wise and playing time wise. So I can only imagine what you're dealing with. But can you just touch on I'm sure in the senior national team locker room, you have the Israelis and then you also have the American Jews. Can you kind of talk to me about what that locker room's like? Because I can only imagine just from hearing you talk about, the U.S., how they train and how they think of the game, and also the Israelis, how they think of the game, how they train. Is there any conflict, or is it not really at all?
It is a unique dynamic, and I think there's a lot of, overlap in certain areas. And for myself specifically, having been in Israel now for the past 3 years or so, I'm sort of in that in-between space. I'm considered like an Israeli player, but also I'm an American because that's what I was brought here to begin with. And so I have a bit of both worlds. And I think the biggest thing is that all the Israeli players, they're a bunch of sponges. They're absorbing every word, everything that they can take in from, the American players, Ryan Lavarnway, Ty Kelly, anybody on the team that's played such high level ball. They have such insight to give, and the Israeli, my teammates that are Sabras, born and raised here, they just eat up every single word that comes out of their mouth, and it's great because they grow so much. We mentioned Asaf. Even Asaf is a great example. Grew up through the system here in Israel. We're teammates at Delta, our freshman year, and he's now playing such high level baseball. I mean, he says it too. He's like, I just absorb everything that they say in the locker room, and it just makes him so much better. And there's really a good dynamic. Everybody's, treated the same way. Nobody's better than anybody else. We have guys that have had tenured careers in the big leagues, and then guys who've never even, left the state of Israel until their first tournament on the national team, for example. And just like I said, such different backgrounds, but when we're all in the same locker room, we're all in the same clubhouse, we're all the same there. And it's been a really cool experience just to, pick the brain of some of these guys and see how the Israeli players interact with them. And it's awesome to witness.
Yeah, I can 100% relate to that. A lot of the Israelis that play on our softball team, they look up to us, right? They've never seen that sort of training to that capacity, and just weren't raised that way, right? So that's just part of, and I'm sure you can relate to that, is what we want to share with them and kind of help continue to grow the sport and get them on that same sort of pedestal when they have the opportunity. So I can definitely relate on that one.
Absolutely. It goes even to things like having a routine. Guys, they're not used to, having a pregame routine or just a postgame routine or the night before, like all these different things. National team tournaments are a great time for guys to just really see the whole process of what goes into making up a high level ball player.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we were actually interviewing Asaf, and he was talking about when he first came over to the States, he was just like, it is a different animal. He was like, I had to learn how to eat right. I had to learn how to sleep my 8 hours. And, us three here were kind of like, that's just like common sense, but for someone who lived in Israel and the training wasn't as intense, it's like a whole new world.
Right. Total shell shock. Absolutely. So again, that's why these guys, the American guys on the team, the American Jewish guys on the team, they're the best mentors that we could have,
Yeah, you had quite the journey to get where you are now. You battled some injuries, you had COVID, shifting gears a little bit, but kind of on the same track. What continued to bring you back and, keep on wanting to play and, look where you are now, look how far you've come. But, I'm sure there was some lows and a lot of highs along the journey. Kind of speak to a little bit to that point.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, good. The only way to die on a roller coaster is if you jump off, right? Like it's just been a wild up and down ride, but I've stuck it out. And I think just the love of the game is the biggest thing that's just kept me coming back. I've been plagued by injuries throughout, the higher level side of my career after my freshman year. Like Danny, you touched on in the introduction, had a big hip surgery that put me out for about 8 months. And, my second day in the cages coming back from that injury, I tore my oblique and found myself 3 days later heading to San Jose from Nevada, from Reno, with my athletic trainer, and going under again for another surgery, put out for another 6 months. Was fortunate enough to land another opportunity with UC San Diego. A lot of that due to the fact that they were recruiting actually one of my teammates at Delta. They saw my name come up in the portal and they recognized me from recruiting one of my buddies. So they took another chance on me, and was very grateful for that. And it was during that window when I was really in the transfer portal after my second surgery and COVID. And I was like, wow, I don't know if anybody's going to roll the dice on me again. It was very discouraging. Ended up going to UCSD, which ironically it fulfilled a dream of mine. I wrote in like my journal as a kid, probably 10 years old or whatever, like my dream is to play Division I college baseball in Southern California, very specific. And so just being able to, fulfill that dream was so special to me, and sort of another motivator to just never lose hope, never lose sight. And then as I was switching gears from Nevada in the portal, looking at, all the options, exploring, the next move, I really thought to myself, I'm like, okay, take baseball out of the equation. Where would I also just want to be, in life and in general? And, UCSD was the right fit. And fortunately, I was also plagued by injury and COVID there too. Had COVID, and then it had long-term residual effects, and fractured my hand in a fluke accident at first base during a scrimmage, and just everything, seemed like it was stacked against me. And again, felt very discouraging. But I never lost hope, never lost sight. It did sort of inspire me to explore what life without baseball could be, and which is what led me to getting very involved with the Jewish life on campus. I really wanted to see what else was out there. And that's when I started, I was the president of our Zionist group on campus. I was like leading things at Hillel and Chabad, and just doing a lot, and joined the Jewish fraternity, AE Pi. So I really, while baseball was still main focus, I was like, okay, I got to start to really figure out, who else I am besides Blake, the baseball player. And then that's when also, everything just sort of falls into place how it should. And that's when I got the opportunity to represent Team Israel, and really just revived my career again. So I'm very fortunate, to have that opportunity. And the whole way that came about too was through Asaf, my freshman year at Delta. He got me in touch with the right people. I told him, it's funny, I had first reached out to Nate Fish in 2013, like around my bar mitzvah year, when I had first realized that Team Israel was even a thing. I saw them play in the WBC qualifier against Spain, I think who it was. And I immediately reached out to Nate Fish, and we sort of been in touch throughout that time. And then at Delta is when I got in touch with Asaf, obviously, as a teammate. And so, it was up and down, up and down, up and down. And then being able to, represent our country, represent our people, and still selfishly, have some sort of career. It's been such a blessing.
Absolutely. And, just a fun fact, I was actually an AE Pi in college too.
All right.
Yeah.
We could do the handshake virtually.
Yeah, we could. Absolutely. Through all the ups and downs, I'm sure there was a few moments that stuck out to you in your playing and, current coaching career. Do you have any on the top of your mind that stick out to you?
Yeah, definitely. So, like I said, it's just been such a roller coaster, and been so fortunate to be able to represent our country and play. Most recently, some, pivotal moment happened in this recent senior national team in this recent men's tournament in Prague. Great success on the under 23 team. And that was really a good kickstart into going over to the men's national team. And, I was playing really well early on in the tournament. We had an exhibition game against the Netherlands, and started in the outfield, had a couple base hits that game, a couple walks, did real well defensively. And then game one against Switzerland in that tournament, we had a great game. Again, I had like a couple hit by pitches. I hit a double, got robbed of a home run, was, riding this high, feeling really good about the tournament. We get back to the hotel, and it's such a fluke accident. We go up to the fitness center. We had an ice bath there, a sauna, like really cool setup. So I'm with Brett Holtz, who I know you had on as well. Holtzy, shout out to Holtzy, love you, man. And I was with Ryan LaVarnway, and we're doing some recovery stuff. And I'm in the ice bath. I'm getting ready to go over to the sauna. And like a cartoon character, my legs go above my head. I slip out of the ice bath, thank God I kind of braced myself, but I landed on my back against the stairs, and it completely sliced open my back. I had to get 8 stitches or something across my back, bruised a rib. And I was just like, you got to be kidding me, man. Like, this is my time. This is my moment I've been dreaming of for years after game 1. And then spent that whole, it was Erev Yom Kippur, actually, spent the whole first half of Yom Kippur in a Czech emergency room. You haven't lived until you've spent time in a Czech emergency room, by the way. That's a whole different beast right there. They stitched me up. Shout out our trainer, Richard Connie, a junior. We call him Junior. He was a great help during that whole process, but that held me back immensely during the tournament. I was essentially bedridden for the next 3-4 games. There was no shot that I was going to be able to come back. The trainers are telling me, no way, no way. And, I responded with that by saying, like, absolutely, I'm coming back. Like, just watch me. So I spoke with Fish. We sat on it a couple times. I ended up coming back in the game against Sweden. I got a pinch hit in that game, and I had 8 stitches in my back and was just on like 5 ibuprofen and muscled through. And then the last game against the Czech Republic, I started that game. And so it really just was a tough moment for me. It was a really just big moment in my life and in my playing career, having, like I said, not the most opportunity due to injury and different factors in my college career, and having, this as my moment to shine, and then not being sort of, sidelined as well to another fluke accident. It just really was it tested my perseverance and all that, and was just fortunate enough to come back from it. But that was a huge moment in my career where it just was sort of, again, just like these ups and downs, and such a freak accident at the biggest moment of my career. Thank God I was able to push through it. But
That's a crazy story.
it was insane. Ryan Lavarnway just ran out of the sauna. He saw it through like the little window of the sauna, and he just went into full dad mode. So I give him so much credit, and we're good buddies. He lives in Denver too. So whenever I'm back, we get together and we just talk about how crazy that was.
Maddie, if it's okay, I just want to ask you. So this question actually comes to you from Itai Spinoza, just putting that out there. So I'm sure you probably know what it is, but I have to ask, what happened in the hot tub at the Euros?
That's what happened. It was an ice tub.
That's the story.
That's the story. Itai. So Itai, shout out Itai, love you, man. He's my roommate on all these tournaments. So we've been roommates a couple times, and God, he couldn't believe it. He wasn't up there at the time, but I remember him just rushing up from the room, and he's just like, "Are you kidding me, man? Are you kidding me?"
So it was the cold tub, not the hot tub.
The cold tub. Yeah, we were in the cold tub.
That's a good story.
We got the story without even asking the question.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah, that's great. Oh man, I'm gonna have to tell them about that. That's funny.
I mean, they say the Jewish people are resilient, right? So you're a perfect example of that. But where do you kind of get, this mindset to keep pushing on? Were you raised this way? Like, who are some of your biggest influences that kind of helped shape that mindset?
Coach Mom. That's what I call my mom, Coach Mom. Both my parents, my mom and my dad, they're just the best people in the world. They have always just instilled sort of that mindset of, life's full of challenges, control the controllables, overcome adversity, never give up on anything, especially if it's a dream or a passion. And it's just sort of been, embedded in my DNA from square one. And then not only that, when I got to college, my freshman year at Delta, we studied the late, great Dr. Ken Ravizza, pioneer sort of in the mental game of baseball. One of the sort of like original sports psychologists, worked with Cal State Fullerton back in the day, worked with the Cubs, I think, for a bit. He unfortunately passed away not that long ago, but we had a class essentially it was based off of his books, Heads Up Baseball 2.0. And it was all about the mental side of the game, and just really learning how to, overcome adversity, and how to keep your emotions in check, and just how it relates, everything off the field, and how it relates to the product on the field. And just really, I started to really dive into the mental side of things, and it just really helped me with, overcoming any sort of adversity on the field and off the field. So really just, like I said, instilled in me from my parents day one, but then really started to build off of it from a different sort of like academic perspective when I got to college. And so that's something that I've really taken to heart, and something that I really try to push on to the kids here from a coaching standpoint as well.
Yeah, that's sweet. The mental side is everything in this game, as you know, and also just teaches you life lessons as you try to navigate this world we live in. So That's great.
Absolutely.
So kind of segueing. So we had a few, obviously had a lot of guests on and we kind of got their opinion. Like Halsey's a perfect example of, post October 7th at Columbia, kind of got his opinion on that. We kind of got to see it from a US side. You live in Israel, so you have a completely different perspective on like what actually happened and how crazy and chaotic it must have been over there. So if you don't mind, if you're comfortable with it, could you
Totally.
kind of take us through how it changed Israel forever?
Yeah, look, I could speak on this all day long. We could do a whole other pod about this. So I kind of touched on it. Like I said, at UCSD, I was the president of Tritons for Israel. It's our Zionist group on campus. Founded a few other clubs and orgs from a Jewish standpoint. And, even before October 7th, we were dealing with this kind of stuff on campus. Maddie, I'm sure you saw it too, with the whole apartheid week, hate Israel week, a bunch of, stuff going on. It wasn't as shocking as the stuff we've seen recently, but, I dealt with it there. And, being in Israel now, it's crazy. A lot of the stuff that goes on in the States is not as prevalent here. We have our own issues that we're dealing with. Obviously, just the fact that it's such a foreign concept to Israelis that anti-Semitism even exists, right? They've grown up in the one Jewish state in their Jewish bubble, never experienced any sort of anti-Semitism aside from rockets being launched at them, right? Other than people trying to kill them. But in terms of, college students and just our peers saying horrible, horrible things, that hasn't really been a thing here until October 7th. And now it really just, it woke up the society here to these things that have just been laying dormant for so long. And now everybody's just out of the woodworks, out of the closet, and is just, full of hate. And so, it's interesting how it shaped the society here. I feel like in a lot of ways it's rallied people together. It made a lot of people realize that, we're sort of fending for ourselves here, right? We have a lot of allies, fortunately, in different areas, but at the end of the day, like, Jews have other Jews' backs, right? We're all we have. I've heard stories from buddies who have traveled abroad from Israel, and the first time they've felt the need to cover their Magen David necklace or not wear a kippah in public, or for example, when we travel, we have a security brief beforehand for a tournament, and they're like, yeah, don't speak Hebrew in public, don't wear any Magen David or Timashud gear in public when we're in certain places. And so it's interesting. I think it's really just, it's a wake-up call in a lot of ways to the society here.
It's sad that it took what happened. I mean, especially like you said, because we've all been dealing with anti-Semitism our whole life. And I don't know if that's mostly ignorance. I don't know if it's just outright hate. Sometimes you can tell, but yeah, things are just getting out of hand. I mean, I saw a video at Yale today of people blocking, Jewish students going to class. It's like, all right, really? So it's very interesting to hear your take, especially living in Israel, because it could not be more different for either side or either state, either country,
Right. It's the contrast. There's such a contrast. And a lot of that factored into my decision to living here full time, not just, getting my citizenship and playing ball and whatever else like that. That's a huge reason why I live here, because I've gone on a more religious path and journey that's sort of ebbs and flows, and I'm outwardly Jewish now. I wasn't always that way growing up, and I really just felt that this is the place where I'm the safest. And it's ironic because we're the ones that are under attack on 7 fronts of a war, yet I feel far safer when I'm here than I do when I'm back in the States, just because of all of the stuff going on not only just on campuses, but just in the streets and elsewhere, right? It's shocking. So like I said, Israelis were blind to that up until recently. And like you said, it's sad that that's what it took, but that's the reality we're in.
Yeah. I mean, I remember clear as day, I was walking out of my apartment building, and there were like signs of hostages, and I saw people ripping them down. And I was like, it was like 3 or 4 dudes, and it was just me and my fiance and our dog. And I was like, I'm gonna go say something. And I was like, stop tearing it down. Like, what are you doing? And then I started thinking, I'm like, it's 4 against 1. Like, I don't know how they're going to react. Thank God it wasn't like violent. They just basically started yelling and screaming at me. But after that, I'm like, you know what? I'm like, I better be careful. I mean, like, I could get in serious trouble.
Yeah, it's scary, man. And I think, we as athletes and, you having this platform, like, we have the unique opportunity to be able to use our voices for some good now, right? And really just, educating people on, just what's going on and correcting misinformation when you see it, and using our voices to be a light unto the nations like the Jewish people are, like Am Yisrael is. And, I think that's something too, as, as a national team player who grew up in the States, who most of my network in the States are not Jewish, on Instagram, I feel as if, if I post some story or repost something, Maddie, I'm sure you've seen a lot of my stuff that I've posted. Like, that's my small way of just trying to, do my part in combating all this nonsense and hatred that's going on.
Sure. Yeah. Obviously a very emotional topic and like super heavy on the heart. But I think, kind of like you said, it just brings light to be able to connect with people like you and Danny and all these other guys that are coming on the podcast. That brings a sense of hope and just positivity that we're all yearning for, So I can also relate on having to cover up our gear and, like walking into a complex where people don't even know what team we are because our bags are covered and we're wearing t-shirts over our jerseys. So, I think that just adds to the sense of pride that we have of being Jewish baseball and softball players, right? That just comes with it. And I think that as soon as you step on the field with your teammates and, these other girls or guys that were brought up similarly, whether it's in the US or in Israel. But question for you, how do you stay level-headed knowing that there's so much anti-Semitism going on and, just the political climate we live in? How do you stay level-headed when you do get on the field or just, in everyday life? What do you kind of,
Good question. And I think that's where the mental side of baseball really has an impact in day-to-day life, right? Just, keeping myself in check with, breath work is a big one, for example. It's amazing the power of breathing, what that can do. Also, trying to reduce my amount of doom scrolling on social media. That's such a cesspool of just hate. And, I can get stuck on there for hours of just seeing just a bunch of horrible, horrible things. So limiting my time there. But then also, like I said, I'm on a bit more of like a religious, spiritual journey and just understanding like, this is what God said was going to happen. Like, plain and simple, like we're the tiniest nation in the world. We're the most hated, it's just the way it is. And so oddly enough, I find comfort in that, knowing like, this is how it's always been. This is just how it is. Like, yet we've always, like you said, Maddie, at the beginning, like the Jewish people persevere and we overcome. Like, that in itself gives me such peace of mind, knowing like, okay, I can allow this to consume me and allow this to throw me off my game and impact me in different, aspects of my life. Or I can just be like, you know what? This is the way things are. This is the way things have always been. And I can match this hate with more hate, or I can meet this hate with just love and positivity. And that's, sort of the mindset. And that's what I choose to do.
100%. And I think that's what gets missed also about like baseball and softball, which I love about it, is not only is it a microcosm of life and just has so many life lessons built within the game, but it doesn't matter if you're Israeli or if you're from the Czech or the DR, you got to play the same game. You got to hit the ball, you got to score. It's the same for everybody. And I think that's the beautiful thing about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're all on the same playing field, literally and figuratively, right? Good point.
And, I guess one of my last questions for you, and I ask everybody this, is, what is your advice to the younger generation, especially with the climate now and maybe some being afraid to be Jewish publicly and them struggling with all the hatred they see online? What's your advice to them?
Wear it loud and proud. Don't be afraid to hide your identity, but be reasonable and be safe. Don't be going up to a pro-Palestinian protest and rubbing your Star of David necklace in people's faces, right? That's not constructive. It doesn't do any good. Look, I recently spoke at an event in Jerusalem, sort of sharing my experience from my college experience with kids that are getting ready. They were in a gap year program. They're getting ready to go to college in America. And a similar question was asked. And the way I answered it was, like you said, we have a horrible reputation. We're hated by a lot of people, and we're just very misunderstood. And to me, the way to handle that is by, doing mitzvot, doing good deeds. Imagine, somebody on a college campus has never had a Jewish friend or even talked to a Jewish person. They see all this stuff on social media that they're supposed to hate them. And then they see somebody wearing a Star of David necklace or a yarmulke go help one of their peers out carry their books up the stairs, or picking up some trash on the side of the quad or whatever, starting to associate, like, allowing people to associate Judaism with good, and it starts with the smallest act of kindness or the smallest deed. If you're not outwardly Jewish, just still be a good person. Like I said, we all have a platform, no matter how small or how big. Start to use that for good if you choose to. I'm not one to preach to the choir and tell people you need to be posting, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing that. If you're not comfortable, then don't. But again, understanding that this is the way it is, lean in on your Jewish peers and community. You don't have to go through this anxiety and trauma alone. Bond with fellow Jews who we're all going through the same thing, right? And just be a good person. Allow it. I have the phrase in Hebrew, like, be a kiddush Hashem, good work in the name of God. And if you're, it doesn't need to be from a religious standpoint, even. It's just, from a Jewish perspective in general, just be a good person, do good things. You never know how far one small act of kindness can go in terms of, leaving an impression on other people. So, long answer longer, just, be a good person, do good stuff. Don't be afraid to be Jewish. We have a gift. We're blessed to be Jewish. We're part of a really special tribe, and, make the most of it.
Stand on business.
Stand on business, baby. That's it.
Love it.
Maddie, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, Blake, it's been awesome to connect. I know we probably crossed paths a few times at UCSD, maybe for a year or so, but definitely been following your journey and, you living in Israel, and it's inspiring, and, continue to do what you're doing. And I hope that we can continue to keep in touch. I know we will. And we mentioned it earlier that Israel baseball and softball, it's a small world. So we're all tied together, and we're all going through this together. So, yeah, it's been great talking with you, hearing a little bit more about your story, and good luck with everything.
Thank you. Likewise. I hope both of you can make it out this way really soon, and we can get together and get a shawarma and, hang out at the beach and, have a good time here. So
yeah,
both of you guys, Kenny, Maddie, it's been a blast. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on and taking the time out of your day. And, I hope we can have you back on when the Euros are coming around, because love to get real-time updates, kind of what's going on. And yeah, I hope I make it over there sooner rather than later.
For sure. And we're excited for what's ahead of us, and just keep doing what you're doing. I've been, Maddie, like you said, I've been following your journey too. You're doing awesome things. Keep doing what you're doing. I'm excited to see where it takes you. And Danny, this pod has been awesome. I know it's gonna blow up and do big things. So I appreciate you sharing our stories and sharing our voices. And I'm excited to see, where it takes you guys.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Awesome, man. It's been a blast. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.